There are certain common roadblocks that a lot of writers face, which can really sabotage your novel if you're not careful. So in this video, we're going to look at 9 of them, and I'm going to help you step by step walk you through them how to avoid these pitfalls. Let's get started right away with number 1, virtue plateauing. So the question is, how do you create change in a character who is basically good at the very beginning of your book? So let's just say this isn't the type of story where your character is going to backslide or break bad. And obviously, character change is essential for your story. So how do you accomplish it with a character who starts off good? So let's start by looking at J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and a character you know and love, Samwise Gamgee. Now, from the very beginning of the trilogy, this character really is a good hobbit. He's an excellent friend. He's very loyal. He's very trustworthy. I mean, what could you say that would be bad about him? So the trouble is, how does this character change over the course of 3 books? I think what we see is even though he starts good, there is actually an increase in his faithfulness and loyalty. There are some virtues that happen in a moment in time, something like courage, say. There are other virtues that can only play out across time. You can't be, say, steadfast in a singular moment. You can only be steadfast over a long period of time. And obviously Samwise proves that he's steadfast over the course of this very long journey of taking the ring to Mount Doom. So that's one option. Continue to increase the goodness of your character, so it does seem like there's a character change for the better. For a second example, let's look at Cormac McCarthy, All the Pretty Horses. Here we have a character called John Grady Cole. He is the perfect cowboy, just a solid dude, solid. He's honorable, he is faithful, he is honest. So once again, how do you create character change in a character like this? So over the course of this book and over the course of the 3 books, he just becomes a little bit less naive. He's a little bit less idealistic. He stops romanticizing the West. So he's less of a child and he's just more of an adult. He is wiser. He has more experience. That is character change, but it is character change from goodness to a different form of goodness, just a little bit more experienced form of goodness. And yes, it is subtle, but I would encourage you with your characters, if you have a character that is not making like a huge character arc, look for those subtle character arcs, those small changes from the beginning to the end of the book. The second challenge, which can be quite tricky for authors to navigate, is number 2, description density slippage. This is when your opening chapters have this super dense, immersive sensory details that immediately capture the reader and put them in the scene. And then later on, you just start to forget a few of those details. It starts to become a little bit thin. It becomes a little bit more generic. It becomes a little less immersive. So I propose a test for you. Count the number of sensory details in your first chapter. I'm talking about things like sound, smell, taste, sight, touch, and just graph it out on a line so you can actually see it visually. Now what I want you to do is turn to chapter, say, 12, later on in your book. Do that same thing of counting up sensory details. I would make a wager that there are far fewer later on in your book because you get so caught up with plot and the excitement of finishing the story that you forget, oh yeah, this still needs to be immersive. I still need to be creating a whole world for my readers. Now, an absolute fantastic example of someone who does this really well actually isn't a novel. It's a memoir. It's called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance by Robert Pirsig. So this is a book which grapples with pretty thick philosophical concepts. And he's dealing with these really abstract concepts, like stuff about quality. What is quality? But then he takes these little breaks, these little interludes, and suddenly we're on a motorcycle and we feel the wind in our hair and we see the sun in our eyes and we're set inside this sensory rich environment. Those little interludes are crucial to helping the reader get through the book. Because if it was just dense philosophical abstract talk, it's very difficult to read that for long periods of time. But you throw in these little tidbits and motorcycles and suddenly the reader's like, all right, I like this. And by the way, if you want to get better at writing description, I talk about it a lot more in my writing techniques course in the Bookfox Academy. Check that out, see if it's right for you. It's a fantastic course, if I do say so myself. Now, this third challenge that writers have to overcome is kind of counterintuitive. It might take you by surprise. It's number 3, conflict overdose. Now, I know you've heard from 1,000 writing teachers, you need conflict in your scenes. You can't have a scene without conflict. And you know what? Those people are right. In fact, they are so right that some people go overboard and they just include too much conflict. And the conflict starts to feel artificial. It starts to feel like the author shoehorned it in there just because they weren't sure how to make the story work. So they're like, I know, more conflict. For an example of this, look at The Wilds. It's streaming on Amazon Prime. It's basically a bunch of women stranded on a desert island. And after a while, I realized all these women do is is fight. And it started to feel very contrived. The writer of the show didn't take enough time to work on the harder elements of friendship or sacrifice or forgiveness or things like that. The author just took an oversimplified road of throwing in conflict after conflict after conflict, and it was too much. Ursula Le Guin actually has a wonderful craft book for writers called Steering the Craft. I would recommend that you check it out. And in Steering the Craft, she writes, conflict is one type of behavior. There are others equally important in any human life, such as relating, finding, losing, bearing, discovering, parting, changing. So Le Guin is pointing out that you can't only have conflict in a story. You have to capture the other parts of human existence as well, or else your story will seem lopsided. And a great way to do that is just to include radical acts of kindness in your stories. Stuff like forgiveness, stuff like kindness, stuff like sacrifice. Now, for the next challenge, the solution might seem obvious, but I think it's a little trickier than that. Let's look at number 4, subplot orphaning. So subplot orphaning is just when you start up some very intriguing and interesting subplots, but then somehow as the main plot takes over, those subplots get forgotten and drop to the bottom of the barrel. This makes readers very angry, obviously, because they have expectations that are unresolved, and then they give you bad reviews and you go and cry in a corner of your house. So don't orphan your subplots. Now let me address 2 concerns that I see pretty frequently in stories. One, most writers don't forget the subplot entirely. Most writers will come at the end of the book and be like, oh yeah, that subplot, let me wrap that up quickly. But the trouble with that is you need the subplot to be interspersed evenly throughout your story. You can't have a strong subplot for first half of the book and then all of a sudden a whole gap and then address it again at the end. That's a problem. So identify one of your subplots and then map out where that subplot occurs over the course of your story. Make sure it's spaced out evenly and throughout the whole book. The second subplot concern is a little bit trickier. And honestly, I see a lot of very experienced writers fall prey to this one. Sometimes with subplots, you see some spinning wheels, which means the subplot keeps getting addressed periodically throughout the book, but it feels like it's not advancing the storyline in any way. Every single scene with your subplot needs to get us a little bit closer to the conclusion of that subplot. So here's what I want you to do. Little exercise time. Bust out a sheet of paper or something, and I want you to create a timeline of your subplots throughout your book. Have little lines for all your chapters, and then have little dots or something that show where your subplot appears. Next, you should just say a word or a phrase that indicates how this particular subplot section drives the story forward. If you have a large gap between dots, that lets you know, okay, you're not doing this often enough. And if you can't come up with a particular word or a phrase that describes how the subplot is moving forward, then that's a good sign that you might be spinning your wheels. Now, this 5th challenge might have the best title in this entire video. Kind of proud of it, I gotta say. It's number 5, genre gravity wells. So what I find is when authors reach the end of their book, they sometimes are struggling to know how to finish it off. And so what happens is they sort of get sucked into these familiar genre conventions because they're struggling to come up with something, and these are just the first storytelling techniques that they think about. Please, please resist the gravitational pull to make your story conform to a tired old trope, something that readers have seen a billion times before. What you want to do is take the level of originality that you applied to your first chapter and make sure you apply that toward the end of your book too. Don't run out of steam. And let's look at an example of this from David Mitchell, who is the author of Cloud Atlas, but we're actually looking at another book by him called The Bone Clocks. Now, hey, I am a big David Mitchell fan, but I did not like The Bone Clocks, and I think I figured out why. What I love about David Mitchell is his sheer originality. Like, Cloud Atlas was a groundbreaking novel with all of these different worlds colliding into one another. And even a good percentage of The Bone Clocks I enjoyed quite a bit. But then, when we get to the end of The Bone Clocks, he just throws in this really bad storyline of immortal beings fighting with each other and like a gigantic, confusing fight scene that bears no resemblance to most of the book that had been written. See, most of the book felt very original, but then the ending felt very cliche, and that is a problem you want to try to avoid. Listen, I have made videos about endings before. I discuss endings a lot in my novel course, but you have to make sure that you do the work of like focusing on that ending to make it as non-cliche and as perfectly right for your story as possible. The 6th challenge that writers face when writing their novel is trite problems as gargantuan plots. Do you ever get frustrated when you read something where the entire problem of the whole plot could be solved by a single text message or email or line of dialogue, because that frustrates me. It's sort of like an upside down pyramid, where this little tiny issue that could be so easily resolved ends up creating this gargantuan pyramid of problems. And yes, I know you could say like, oh, this is true to life and stuff, but I find that narratively speaking, it creates sort of this weak hinge for your story. The entire story is hinging on this very, very small detail that could be so easily solved. For an example of this, let's look at the miscommunication trope. Maybe the character didn't say anything, or maybe they said something and it was completely misinterpreted, but somehow two characters were speaking past each other or not speaking at all to each other. I think this is a problem because we like to see our protagonists as being semi-competent and smart, and when there's something that could have so easily solved the problem, we're like, come on, why didn't you do that? Ideally, you want the size of the problems in your novel to be proportional to the size of your plot. If you have a gigantic plot, there needs to be a genuinely big problem that creates that plot. Now, I know there are exceptions to this, and feel free to name some of those in the comments section, but I'll just name one exception. It's an old Christmas movie, and I watch it every year. It's kind of my favorite. White Christmas. There's basically a whole plot around someone eavesdropping and then misunderstanding what they hear, and it creates the friction in the story. But I will say it's a very like innocent movie with kind of low stakes, so having a low stakes problem matches the low stakes plot. Now, if you do use a miscommunication trope, my advice is to make it part of a minor plot point rather than like the whole plot point that the whole book hinges upon. Now, for this next point, I'm going to guess that 99% of writers watching this are immediately going to start nodding and being like, oh yeah, that's my problem. It is number 7, narrative climate shifts. This is when you unintentionally change the tone of your book in between different sections of your novel. And the reason that this happens is it takes a long time to write a novel, right? You know this. And sometimes your vision for the book changes over the course of writing it. Sometimes you just get better. And so the second half of your book, like you can tell you gain some skills than from when you were writing at the beginning of the book. And then in some of the books that I edit, there ends up being a kind of genre shift over the course. And by the way, if you do want to consult with me on editing your book, I'm going to put a link to that in the description below. For instance, I've edited books that start off as more literary realism, and then somehow by the end, they shift into more Caped Crusader vigilante sort of storylines. I've edited other books that start off as kind of being more poetic historical novels and then shift into more rom-com territory. Now, to solve this problem, what you want to do is, first of all, decide which side do you prefer? Is it the second half of the book or is it the first half of the book? Some of the time, the right choice is entirely to change one section of the book and bring it up to speed to match the other section. And then the other choice would be to make both sides change so they can both be a little bit similar to each other. For the 8th challenge that writers face, let's look at number 8, the decay curve. This is when the beginning of a novel is much more polished than the end of the novel. And writers, we know why this is. We work so hard to get the beginning like just right, and we comb over it 10,000 times. But then by the time that we've reached the end of a novel, we're rushing. We're trying to finish the book. We're writing those climactic scenes that we've had in our brains for so long, and it's going really quickly. So it's just a little less polished because we spent less time on it. And Zadie Smith, who has written books like White Teeth and Swing Time, wrote about this in a collection of essays called Changing My Mind. And the specific essay I'm drawing this from is called That Crafty Feeling. She talks about how the very first 20 pages of her book, she winds it up. There's this obsessive level to detail where like everything has to be just perfect. And so for her, part of the process of writing a novel is once she's finished the novel, she has to go back to those first 20 pages and unwind them a little bit, make them a little bit more casual. She describes it as letting a little air in, which I love that metaphor. And then obviously there's the flip side where once you write the ending, you have to make sure you pay equal attention to crafting it and getting it just right to mirror the perfectionism that you showed at the beginning of your novel. For our last and final challenge that writers have to struggle with, let's look at number 9, payoff deflation. This is when the final resolution in your book gets a lot less page time than what you devoted to the buildup, which leaves the reader feeling like there's kind of an imbalance. Now, if I stop the video right here, see that? That's called payoff deflation. You've been waiting this entire video for me to get to number 9 and explain what it is. And if I only gave, say, 5 or 10 seconds to it, you'd be like, wait, what was that? You would feel cheated. But a lot of authors do that with their novels. We have been waiting for the entire novel to see like the payoff, to see what happens. And it happens in like 2 pages and we're done. Now, this isn't about tying off loose narrative threads. You can tie off all the loose ends of a story in a very short amount of time. What we're talking about is pacing. What we're talking about is proportion. If you write an 800-page book and then spend 3 pages quickly wrapping it all up, you're gonna make readers really angry at you. If you write, say, a 300-page book and then spend, say, 10 pages wrapping everything up, that gives the reader enough time to process the ending and they're gonna feel satisfied by that. So 3 very quick pieces of advice for what to do in a situation like this. 1, you want to give the reader the feeling of an ending to help them feel like they're winding down. 2, the ending is a way to subtly congratulate the reader for sticking with you for the whole book. And so this is time for catharsis. This is time to give the reader that feeling like, oh man, I'm really glad I completed this. And then 3, this is the moment to ease the reader out from the world of the book and ease them back into the real world. If you do that too quickly, it's gonna be unpleasant for the reader. You have to like usher them gently out of the world of the book. Give them some time to process the fact that the book is coming to a close. I hope all that advice was very helpful as you're writing your novel. Please check out the links in the description for copy editing, for publicity, for Bookfox Academy, and for my developmental editing, and happy writing.